To date, word of mouth is one of the largest reasons that we've made something like 7,000 garments in the last 5.5 years. It's because if you make one great looking sport coat for one guy walking down the street and somebody says, hey, that looks great, where'd you get it? And they send him over here, that then turns into 2 more clients, and that turns into 4 more clients, and that turns into 10 clients, and it just compounds from there and goes, cruises, and it requires less nurturing than if you had an inferior product and an inferior, branding to your company.
And welcome back to Have a Map, where we talk all things career. I'm excited for today. Have someone who was recommended to us from a good friend of mine in the fashion world. And obviously, we all love fashion and also love suits. So excited to hear how he got his start and how he kind of transformed into doing his own thing. So, but before we get there, I want to introduce our co-host, Sean Anderson. Sean, can you give them say a quick little few words about who you are, where you're from, all of that good stuff?
Definitely. So, hi everyone. My name is Sean Anderson, pronouns he, him, his. I am a junior at Loyola University Chicago, and I am a social media intern here at DIM Events. I grew up in St. Louis, having fun times during the pandemic, making things work, and I'm really excited for this interview opportunity.
Yeah. And Sean is for some reason, I'm a DePaulian, and Sean went to Loyola, and there's a strong amount of Loyola students in our internship that actually all randomly know each other right now. So it's very fascinating right now in our internship.
We all happen to have one class right before the pandemic together. So now that we're all seeing each other over Zoom screens, we're just like, I know you. Finally somebody.
Beautiful, beautiful. And today our guest is Zach Uttich, and he is from BLVDier. Zach, can you give us a quick introduction about yourself? Say what up to the listeners and all of the good people who listen to Have a Map.
Of course. Thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Zach Uttich. I'm the owner-operator, along with my wife, Kirsten, of BLVDier, which is a clothing company. We have a storefront down in the West Loop here in the city. We've been around for about 5.5 years, and I've been in the business a little over 11 years, although I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago. And unlike you guys, I went to a small school downstate versus school in the city. But I'm a graduate of Millikan University down in Decatur, Illinois. And I've been in the city for as long as I've been in the clothing industry, so for about 11 years.
Wow. And I feel like now saying it and really going back, I used to venture pre-COVID, go to the West Loop a lot. And where is your storefront location? Is that right by the Morgan or the Morgan Train stop?
It's a great question because we recently relocated our storefront.
Okay.
For almost exactly 5 years, we were behind Momotaro at Green Street and Lake Street by the Publican. Mm-hmm. And so we were in a little 750 square foot storefront that was very quaint and kind of a hole in the wall, which was wonderful and what we wanted it to be. And then they built a WeWork across the street and the Hoxton Hotel across the street and put in a ramen san and a Limitless Coffee next door to us. And so the block changed a lot in the 5 years we were there. Actually, 9 days before quarantine started in Chicago, we relocated to 440 North Halsted Street. So we're still technically in the West Loop, bound by Grand and Halsted, but we're on the corner of Halsted and Hubbard at 440 North Halsted.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Sean, I'll kick it off to you so we can get the interview started.
Totally. So you kind of touched on a little bit about what you do and where you work. So what would you say a typical day in your work life looks like?
It's a wonderful question because no day is that similar to the next day. A typical normal day in our store, like I said, my wife and I run it. So it's the two of us. We are the operators, we're the owners. So I do every fitting of every client who walks in the door. And we make a number of garments, from suits to shirts to pants to overcoats. We make women's garments. We make tuxedos, formal wear. And I do every first, second, third, any fitting that happens in the store, I conduct those fittings. Both my wife and I consult with clients. Oftentimes they ask for our advice in styling when it comes to fabrics, et cetera. So normal appointments with a client usually last for about an hour. If they come in to try on their garment, we'll see what adjustments need to be made. Those usually last about 30 minutes. Consultations, about 30 minutes. We have clients who just want to come in and grab stuff. Some clients who just want to come in and look at fabrics to reorder a garment. So on a typical normal day, let's say COVID and our pandemic notwithstanding, we see clients between the hours of 10 and 6, 10 and 7, most days out of the week. Now it's a little bit different for a couple of reasons. One, we're in a new storefront and we have projects to do in here. We actually purchased the storefront during the pandemic. So we own it and we're invested in it a little bit more. We get to do some things around here. So we painted it ourselves. We hung all these racks ourselves. We built the fitting rooms, decorated the store ourselves. This week we are putting together a cabinetry for a little wet bar we're gonna build out. So that's the abnormal, not usual type of task in a given day. Whereas the other side of the day, we meet with clients and make sure they look good.
That's very cool. And I feel like, you touch on so many things there, but how did you get started into the fashion industry, right? Because I feel like, it's definitely a little more cutthroat. It's definitely a lot harder to get into that space. What was your journey like within there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I watched some of your interviews of the podcast here and Have a Map, and I knew this question was coming. And so I was thinking a little bit about it, and most people like food, but that doesn't mean everybody wants to be a chef or a general manager at a restaurant. And while 99.9% of the population has to wear clothing, not everybody cares about fashion or style or clothing in general. Or the history of it, or the purpose of garments, or if they're more luxurious, if they're more utilitarian. And I was when I was younger, I very much cared about clothes. And I think a lot of it gets attributed to magazines, periodicals, watching certain movies, whether it's, James Bond in a 3-piece suit and a shootout in a movie or something like that. Or, reading my mother's fashion magazines that she would bring home from work or something like that. So I think I care about clothes, and having gone to school for theater, I feel like I've always had a bit of a sales side to my work life forever and always. I've worked in restaurants, and I worked for the university I graduated from. I sold furniture, I sold clothing. And so I think really the only way to sell something well is to also care about it and live it and breathe it. So when I got into the fashion industry 11 years ago, it was just because I liked clothes and I wanted a part-time job while I was being an actor in Chicago. And the place that I found that was hiring at the time, which was in 2009, which wasn't the best year for retail coming out of our previous recession, was at a place called Mark Shale, which is kind of an old school men's, women's, like mini private department store. It was 83 years old when it finally closed its doors, but I started there in their 80th year in business.
That's super interesting because I feel like, especially when it comes to an industry like fashion, students kind of like still trying to figure out what they want to do. It feels like there's an immense confusion about like, how do I get from like this beginner stage to this advanced stage? Because especially fashion isn't necessarily something that's kind of like high commodity, high security industry to be going into as a student versus other like sciences maybe, where it's like, all right, I'm going to do this, then this, then this. With fashion, it can kind of feel a little more confusing about like, what are the steps I need to take to get to this end goal?
Well, and that's a perfect segue into what do you want to do in fashion? And that's, do you want to design and make your own clothes? And usually that constitutes going to, a school like FIT in New York, FIT in New York, or going to a fashion school and actually working on patterns, spending a semester in Paris, spending a semester in London or Milan, doing a deep dive into famous fashion designers in the world and sewing techniques and pattern making techniques. That's one side of the industry, which doesn't really present itself in a realistic career setup. Most people, they hear Tom Ford's name or they hear, they see Dior as a fashion label or something like that. And it's kind of past the upper echelon of what they think they can do for a living. And so a lot of people, when they go to school for fashion, they end up finding their way into the marketing side of fashion, the advertising side of fashion, because both of those industries got really, really big, specifically in New York City. So there's a lot of money to be made, or say there was a lot of money to be made in those industries, versus kind of the pocket of the fashion industry that we sit in, where we're a boutique store. We carry a couple different products. We are custom primarily, and that's another subset of the industry. We get into tailored clothing, which is, again, it's not overalls and a t-shirt. It's not a Nike hoodie. It's typically something made out of a woolen fabric and much more based in tradition, versus we're wanting to be fashionable in that regard. So I guess to answer your question, it's difficult, and I guess you don't know if you want to get into business of fashion. You don't know if you want to get into sales of clothing or operations of stores and supply chain management. You don't know if you want to get into, the actual pattern making and designing of clothing, because there's a few different avenues for both. For people who are in like HR, you could just be really good at HR and happen to work for Louis Vuitton. For other people, you could be good at store operations, but you could be in the restaurant industry, you could be in the fashion industry, you could work for Amazon or whatever. So there's a few different ways to go about it. You just kind of have to figure out if your passion lies in clothing or if your passion lies in one of those subset categories that just happens to be for a clothing company.
That makes a lot of sense. And for you, did you always know you wanted to be more in that traditional and customized route, or was that through exploration that you found yourself where you are now?
Listen, I still wear, Nikes, and I still wear, denim, and I kind of came into my 20s in like the heyday of Tumblr and fashion blogs and seeing what, street photography was doing for clothing at different trade shows around the world, whether they were happening in Italy or Japan or New York or whatever. So I think I myself am into the classic traditional clothing. I'm wearing an overshirt today, which is a new design of ours. It just happens to be made out of an Italian flannel. And so I think for most of my garments and most of the styling I do for my own clothes, it's rooted in tradition and certainly has elements of utilitarianism. I want things to be durable. I want pockets to be functional and those side of things. Sean, I don't know if I've ever worn overalls. It's been a long time since I wore overalls, but it's a pretty utilitarian garment, I guess, huh? If you think about it.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a lot of pockets on overalls.
Especially durability, because these I had thrifted from a sustainable maker who upcycled these from an old pair of sheets. So they're very thin, more like flexible, I guess, more lightweight, versus a denim overall where if either you're working or if you just want to have something that can keep you warmer as it gets to colder weather. Very different purposes for the same piece, really.
Sure. and adjustable at the top. So as you grow, you can adjust the garment. But no, a very on-topic trend now: sustainability in fashion and upcycling and recycling materials. So nice job.
All credit goes to the designer.
You got to want to buy it, though.
Very true. Very true.
There's a lot of great ideas that flop because nobody in the general population likes it or appreciates it or wants it. So it's a combination of both. And good on you for wanting to buy that product because of that business practice.
And that kind of great transition, right? When you started your business, how did you get the word out about it, right? Because being in Chicago, I feel like, there's a good amount of boutiques, maybe a few that do some stuff really well, or maybe a good amount that do some stuff really well. How are you getting the word out about your business, right? Because I think that's one thing as students are trying to figure out, hey, do I want to go this entrepreneurial path? Do I want to work at a company and then transition into that space? How do I go about getting the word out about these products that I'm creating, right? Because to your point, you said you can make something really cool, but if no one knows about it, then no one's really going to be able to see it.
So it's a perfect question. And I don't know if we'd have had the success we've had to date if I hadn't spent time at my 2 previous jobs. So I was in the clothing industry for 5.5 years before we started our own store. And at those shops, you of course meet people and you develop relationships with your clientele, and that builds over time. At Mark Shale, which is more or less geared towards 40 to 65-year-old, I worked in the men's department, so 40 to 65-year-old males, most of them have this mentality that they should develop a relationship with a tailor and a clothier and a sales rep and find somebody who can get them the clothes that they want, making sure they fit the way that they prefer. There's a few different ethereal kind of deep-rooted systems in tailored clothing specifically, versus you may or may not find somebody at, who knows, you said you spend time in LA and New York. There's a Supreme store in New York, and there's a Supreme store in LA. Do you know your person who sells you your t-shirt by name? Typically not really, but in the tailored clothing industry, we will, send you a text message when it's your anniversary. We'll write you an email when we know your kid's going to graduate from college. And so when I spent my time at Mark Shale, it was more about developing relationships. And then I went and I spent a little over 2 years at a clothing store called Suit Supply, which is based in Amsterdam. And they had just started opening stores in North America. And so the Chicago store was the second store that they opened, and it was very popular. And we had a lot of people come and go from the store, clients rapidly. It was a quicker experience than it was at Mark Shale. Garments were more expensive. You spent a lot of time at Mark Shale, whereas Suit Supply, the suits started at a pretty low cost, $300, $400, $500, and you could suit up a guy in 15 minutes and they could be out the door. So it was harder to develop relationships, but that was the part of the industry that I really liked. So we had clients that shopped with me at Mark Shale that came over and shopped with us at Suit Supply. We have some clients who shopped with us at Mark Shale that didn't enjoy shopping at Suit Supply, and vice versa. And so when we opened our store in January of 2015, we kind of leveraged some relationships that we have and said, hey, if you enjoyed the experience you had shopping with me at Mark Shale or at Suit Supply, I want to have that same experience with you in our own store and just make it better. How can we take the good things from Suit Supply and the good things from Mark Shale and turn it into something that clients are going to enjoy even more than maybe they thought they could? So that's one reason I attribute how we grew our business and having some sort of ramp up to opening the storefront. The other side of it is we opened in January when hardly anything is opening, let alone a men's clothing store. So we were very lucky to reach out to some periodicals and websites, and they were nice enough to say, hey, new store opening. And we couldn't afford a PR firm at the time to do that work for us. So we were just sending out emails and Urban Daddy and DNA Info. And, usually if you have enough of that free press, it kind of snowballs a little bit. And we've been fortunate enough to be highlighted in Details Magazine and Wall Street Journal and Monocle magazine, and a few things that kind of happened because the previous thing happened. So that's another reason. And then I'd like to think the last reason is, once you get one person in the door, you should ideally make them have an over the moon experience so that they go on tell a friend. And to date, word of mouth is one of the largest reasons that we've made something like 7,000 garments in the last 5.5 years. It's because if you make one great looking sport coat for one guy walking down the street and somebody says, hey, that looks great, where'd you get it? And they send him over here, that then turns into 2 more clients, and that turns into 4 more clients, and that turns into 10 clients, and it just compounds from there and goes, cruises, and it requires less nurturing than if you had an inferior product and an inferior, branding to your company, and you didn't give out good service. It has to do with a lot of things, to answer your question kind of in a long-winded way.
No, I think that was perfect. Like, I think a lot of people need that insight to understand it, and understand like what that transition might look like. My last question, and then I'll let Sean jump in here, but I think a lot of people, when they're making that transition from corporate, or not corporate, but from a full-time job to entrepreneurial side, there's some fear in there, right? You're really relying on yourself. And I know I had to do the same thing. And in doing so, how did you know it was the right time to make that jump?
You'll never know. You'll never know when the right time is. And my time at both my previous jobs was great. And of course, with most jobs, there's things about it you love, and there's things about it you like, and there's things about it you don't like. And so after I left Food Supply, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And we weren't sure if we were able to open up our own store. So I interviewed at Ralph Lauren, and I interviewed at Trunk Club, and was trying to figure out if I was really going to be happy at any of these jobs that were available. And I said to my wife, I said, I think we should open up our own store. And so I spent, 2 months on a couch planning while my wife was working full time, making sure we had health insurance. And then when we finally, incorporated as a business and go through the planning stages and figuring out financing and how we were going to actually sign a lease and open up a storefront and buy fixtures and find manufacturers to do different things, it's scary. There's no which way around it. It's just frightening all the time. And you're not getting good sleep, and your weight's fluctuating, and you're nervous all the time. But you're betting on yourself, which should give you a sense of pride. And you should have, drive to you, because if you don't have some sort of foresight and like an outlook of what you want things to look like, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice. So having that drive is important. And then once you physically open the doors, you have to bust your butt, and you have to work, as hard as you think you should work to make the business succeed. And so I worked a lot of hours our first year in business, and I paid myself less than $10,000 as a salary for the entire year, which I was able to do because, like I said, my wife was supporting us, and she was also doing operations work for the business in her free time. And I was taking appointments 7 days a week. I was hand delivering garments to customers' offices, to their houses. I was running the UPS every other day to send out clothes to clients. And, I think that's what I think we needed to do, especially in our first year in business. And we ended up making 620 garments our first year in business, which doesn't sound like a lot, two a day at most. And then, the second year was just over 1,000. So we made a step forward our second year, and then things get better and better the more we kind of organized it and put in systems into play. And it gets a little less scary, but being an entrepreneur, I think once you get used to it, you start to sleep a little bit better, whether business is good or bad that week or that month. You sleep a little bit better, and you know your business inside and out, and you're confident every time a client walks in the door, and that you could make sure they leave happy. And that's the end of it, really.
Kind of segueing off of that, just you've had a lot go through your professional career from where you started to where you are now, what would you say that your impact on the world has been, whether it's through your products, whether it's through your customers, or whether it's through your own personal attitude towards your own work?
That's a wonderful question. And I think some of it has to do with the bit we touched on with sustainability and being in the custom clothing industry. We're seeing a pretty big shift that is following the environment and politics and a lot of topical issues right now where the clothing industry has to be less wasteful than we ever have been. And we're fortunately in the world of tailored clothing where we're making one-off pieces. And we're not making 500 sweaters and hoping we sell all 500 of them. And when we only sell 250, we put the other half on sale. And then when we don't sell the final 100, we put them in an outlet mall or, an online discount store or whatever. We're making individual pieces. And so it's a little bit like setting up the dominoes. We're like playing, I'm going to date myself a lot here with this comment. We're like playing with Legos, Lincoln Logs, like we're building something individually. We're not just throwing money at a manufacturer and saying, here, make us 1,000 of something, and then just crossing our fingers that we're going to sell it all. So I think if there's a part of our business that fits in with the rest of the world of the clothing and fashion industry, it's that if we can be any sort of bit successful in what we do, it should certainly help open eyes to bigger clothing companies that are much more inclined to operate in a wasteful capacity and less focused on, the meaningful part of the transactions that we do. Because we do transactions with clients when they walk in the door, but we also do transactions with our vendors and the people who make our socks and our shirts and our pants and our tuxedos and coats and suspenders and umbrellas and all those different relationships are also important. And making sure you choose those vendors because they also have good practices, not just us, but we want to source fabric from fabric mills that are sustainable, environmentally friendly, and as well as the vendors. So I think if that kind of answers your question, I'll stick to that as my answer.
And a lot of the stuff that you talked about, I think is so important and it's good to really get your perspective on it, right? Because I feel like we don't have these typical conversations with people on a day-to-day basis. And one thing you touched on in that entrepreneurial journey was, sleeping, not sleeping, busting your butt, betting on yourself, going day to day, right? For you, what does self-care look like as an entrepreneur, right? As someone who's betting on themselves on a day-to-day basis?
How I answer this question is going to be very important to what my wife, she's listening now. Self-care is more important than I originally thought and put emphasis on. And making sure, so you got to make sure you stay healthy, because at the end of it, if you're not healthy, then you can't do what you love. And that's, not just being a store owner and a clothing designer, but also making sure that my wife and my dog and my family and my friends and everybody's, you're fostering a good relationship with all of those parts of your life, people in your life. I say people, but I also mean my dog. So you also need to have fun. I think there were some times at my previous jobs where I would come home from work and I wasn't a pleasant person to be around. Just, not thrilled with the work that I put in that day or the experiences I had, or even if it's something trivial like my commute to work or something. So you got to enjoy the down parts of your day, and whether it's, again, your job or your commute or interactions you have, getting your takeout for lunch or something like that. You just got to put some, I guess, time and effort into those fleeting relationships as well. We're on a first name basis with every delivery person who comes to our store. We try and make sure to give them gift cards around the holidays just to say thank you for making all the trips to deliver our mail, deliver our packages, pick up things, even the, the ComEd gas person that comes to fix the meter or something like that. You just got to be nice to those people. And then you feel a little bit better about those interactions throughout the day, and it adds up. And so you feel better about yourself, and you understand that everybody's human and everybody makes mistakes, primarily yourself, and that's what you can fix first. So taking care of yourself is very important. Sleeping is very important. Eating healthy is pretty important, although there's really wonderful options in Chicago to not eat healthy. I could give a bunch of shout outs to all the restaurants we're surrounded by, but we are surrounded by a bunch of restaurants in the West Loop here that are pretty phenomenal. So you should eat the healthiest option from your favorite restaurant. I guess maybe that's the compromise.
I see you were looking at your wife a lot on that one. Yep. So I wanted to, that's good.
I'll pose the question, kind of blending between the personal growth and personal development that you've learned over the years, as well as within your career. What advice would you give to young students looking to enter this wide industry that they could start taking action on to be better preparing themselves?
I think an eye-opening experience I had was with travel. I didn't travel abroad until I was 20. I think I was 22 or 23 at the time. But I remember going to Geneva, Switzerland in Europe and seeing guys in tailored clothing and, people in this major international city dressed well to the nines. It was just, I even felt like at the time the H&M store that I went into was so much nicer than the ones we had here in America. And so that started to open my eyes. And in the last 15 years, going to Milan and Barcelona and Amsterdam and I've been to Paris a few times to see what people look like in other parts of the world is important. And then to see what people look like in your own city. So I think early on, especially as I started to care about clothes, I started to pay attention to what other people do with their clothes in their closets and their styling themselves. So it's a gathering of information is probably, I guess, the thing that I'm hinting at is whether or not you care about finance or insurance or, whatever your job is, if you're in the wedding industry, whatever, you got to pay attention to all sides of it. And you have to make sure that when somebody asks you a question, you can answer it intelligently because you have a lot of information that you've taken in about different subjects. And I think when we have clients who come in here who maybe at first assume I'm going to be in a three-piece pinstripe suit every day of that I'm working here, but some days I'm here in sneakers and fitted pair of chinos that I made myself and a sport coat, they say, oh, that's a more kind of relatable side of my clothing, and I can approach that. But it's about a few different things. Really, I think what I'm getting at is that the more information you have about the subject matter that you care about, the better. So yes, internships are fantastic, internships and externships, even working a job just temporarily, saying, hey, I want to bust my butt for 3 months or 6 months or 10 months is important. I don't think I ever took a job that I thought I only wanted to just see what this is like. When I worked at a restaurant, it was for a purpose. I wanted to, make money to go see movies with my friends or, go shopping at the mall or something like that, which I know sounds like an old fashioned thing to say because you guys don't shop at malls anymore. Young people of the world. But so, I mean, I've worked jobs for different purposes. And I think the older I've gotten, the better I've gotten at any of those jobs because I think I pay more attention to what the rest of the industry is like, but also what's portrayed in cinema, on TV shows, in politics, on the news, and taking in all those things and being able to formulate a little bit more of an opinion, again, about the subject matter that I care about, which happens to be clothing.
One thing that's very fascinating that you talked about is definitely like paying attention, right? I feel like that's so much of a task that people don't really pay as much attention to, really, right? because I think that's where a lot of learning can happen, right? And I think it's being intentional within that space of paying attention that you really start to figure out the fine details and really see like, oh, this is why these people do this, or oh, this is why someone's asking for this. And as you start to do that, you start to, you know, not to get too marketing heavy, but you start to predict patterns, right? You get to see like what people are consistently and constantly doing. And I want to ask really about that. Do you see a lot of impact within that in, you know, music, in the music industry, when talking about, you know, more custom garments, or maybe less in that space?
I mean, there are, in the last 6 years or so, a lot of specific lyrics about tailored clothing and songs about the clothing industry. I believe a line in Mr. West's song is, "I get it custom, you a customer," is an interesting one for the clothing industry. There's a song called "Suit and Tie" by Mr. Timberlake. There's a song literally called "Tom Ford" by Mr. Hova. So there's an interesting like love-hate relationship with the music industry and fashion. And it's the robotic side of it is not cool. Let me say this: the more organic it is, the cooler it is. And that's when you saw like you could think of a bunch of instances of people wearing tailored clothing and having it be really cool versus not cool. And like to see the Notorious B.I.G. in you know, a suit it was cool because that wasn't expected. To see like the members of NSYNC in suits at that time was not cool. And so, you know, you see different sides of it, you know, lots of clothing, very little clothing. And so I think there's certainly a part of the population that musicians cater to by how they dress. But again, if they're just dolled up because a costumer put them in stuff, it's less about the organic style that they have and more about how much money and how many sponsorships and how many like advertising dollars they can generate because of it. So, you know, if you think that had Michael Jackson been alive now, would he be, you know, dancing across the stage in a Dior suit or a Jerry Lorenzo Xenia design Fear of God, you know, outfit, because he would be a major pop star or whatever? Is that cool, or is that just like money being flaunted? So again, there's like a love and hate relationship. It's cooler to see musicians in their element, like especially in smaller gigs on stage. We hope that we can have that back one day soon. But seeing them and how they dressed, and like, I don't know, I'm thinking now Kurt Cobain and his like cardigan draped off in his MTV Unplugged special, which was just so cool. And did anybody pay him to wear that cardigan specifically? Absolutely not. It was just the fact that he chose it at that time that made it so iconically cool. So I'm less into music than I maybe just made it sound, but certainly pay attention as far as I can, as far as which clothes are being worn on stage.
Love that answer. Love that answer. Yeah. We love to talk about music, TV, all of that stuff in the internship program. So that's like our daily conversation. But for you, what would you say? We like to end things with on a lighter note. And since you said you're not into music, I'm curious to see what your answer will be. Into music as much, not that you're not completely into music. Yeah. What would you say is maybe an artist or maybe a specific song that you've been listening to, or maybe it's a go-to song that you have that kind of, you know, gets you started on your day or gets you through some of your days?
Yeah, we actually regularly have a discussion about what music to put on in the store. Some of it surrounds which clients are coming in that day. And, you know, a lot of times we know the clients who are coming in that day, whether they're returning after their first fitting to try on their clothes or whether they're a reorder. And so we can kind of manipulate the music to be a little bit more up their alley, or flip it on its head if we know that they expect we're going to have some generic poppy music on and we have Smokey Robinson's Pandora Station playing, or we're playing Jacob Collier, or, you know, I'm a J. Cole fan, so I'll, you know, if a specific song, 1985 by J. Cole is up there as far as songs for me right now. As much as I am like a white kid from the suburbs of Chicago, I am a hip hop fan. And so, you know, after that, we play with Matt Nathanson quite a bit. We'll put on some 80s jams. You know, everybody loves a good 80s jam, especially if they're between the ages of like 28 and 45. Like, you at least have some relationship with 80s music. But it's also important that we don't have too good of music on at the store, because then it distracts from the appointment. People like start jamming out to what's happening on the speakers, and they're not paying attention to the fabrics that we're talking about, or the lapels or the pockets or something like that. So maybe not the answer you're expecting, but that's where I'll leave it.
No, I love that answer. You took us on a few different places, so I think that's a beautiful answer. Sean, what are some songs that maybe you're listening to as well?
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I'm always listening to a lot of lo-fi music where it's just kind of like instrumental beats, mainly while I study, because it helps me stay focused. But recently I've been listening to a lot of like indie music that like blends pop and rap, I'd say. A lot of different female artists I've been listening to, TK Maidza, Rico Nasty, Princess Nokia. They all have a really unique style that I feel like right now I'm just kind of like, everything's moving around for me currently, like just in my life. So that music kind of gives a little solid edge to just be like, all right, everything's moving. We're going to take it head on sort of energy. So
I might need Sean to like do the chat and tell me those artists again so we can turn on a couple in the store.
For sure.
That's one thing I love about the interns. They always have new music and people that I don't have any idea who they are, but it's always some good songs. Good songs. There's a lot of music out there right now, which is crazy, but
that thought you just had is when you know you're getting older. Because I remember when I was young and my parents would be like, "Who is this?" And I'd be like, "You don't know who this is? You know, it's 1996. This is Boys to Men or whatever." And the older I get, the more I'm like, BTS has sold how many records? They're famous in how many countries? And I had no idea who they were before they were on SNL, I guess. But it's bizarre to see, you know, different genres take off, and most of it doesn't pertain to us individually. But then, you know, you hear it on a streaming service or whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm into this. And it certainly streaming services make it easier to listen to music, populating different things for you. But yeah, Sean, I want you to message me those artists so we turn them on.
I'm definitely one of the people that just loves the streaming service because it makes finding new artists like real easy. Because I have so many of my favorite artists I would never have known because they're not on like top 40 radio, stuff like that. Right. So I feel like for my age, my generation, I feel like it really works having such a technology to be able to just connect to whatever we want to be listening to.
Absolutely.
With that, I would like to thank you so much, Zach, for being a part of our podcast. One thing we really like to do at the end of our internships is give everyone a round of applause. So we want to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And we learned so much from you. I think one thing that I'll take away is the idea of being observant, right? And travel. And I love travel. And right now, this pandemic isn't great, obviously, for traveling. You still can, but it's not the same. But traveling and really observing other people's culture and seeing what they're doing, which I feel like is the true insight of, understanding influence and bringing different cultures together and merging it all together. So I do want to thank you so much for that. And thank you, Sean, as well, for being a great co-host today. We truly appreciate you jumping onto the podcast. For everyone who's listening and who's listening during the daytime, the evening, the morning, however you are listening, we want to thank you. And we will see you on our next episode. All right. Bye.